The NBA trade deadline is just passed and there's a lot we need to talk about. Some teams got a lot better while some teams stayed the same, and some teams got even worse. And that's why the trade deadline is one of my favorite periods in the NBA season. It's around the time where a lot of teams start to get desperate and want to build their teams up. And it's also just one of the more entertaining parts of the season as we get to see more and more players get shipped around to new teams. So today we're here to talk about the 3 biggest winners and 3 biggest losers of the trade deadline. Now without further ado, let's get right into the video. Now, the very first winner of the NBA trade deadline this season was the Los Angeles Lakers. And I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. And I think that this trade was the best trade that the Lakers could have made. I mean, just looking at the players that the Lakers got, D'Angelo Russell, a guy who has been having a down year, at his best is a high-end playmaker and scoring threat out of the pick and roll. And of course, he's a guy who can space the floor out for this team. And he's also a guy who can play at the end of games as well. And then you look at a guy like Malik Beasley, another shot creator who can also space the floor out and gives you great depth off the bench as well. And then you look at a guy like Jared Vanderbilt. Jared Vanderbilt has been one of my favorite and most underrated players. He's one of the most versatile defenders in the league and also a great rebounder and finisher around the rim. So the Lakers got back a bunch of young talent and guys who fit the roster very well. And then outside of this trade, they traded for more young talent like Mo Bamba, a guy who still has a lot of potential in this league if used right, and they got him while only giving up an aging Patrick Beverley. So I think that the Lakers are definitely one of the winners of this trade deadline. And now moving on to the first loser of the trade deadline, and that is the Miami Heat. And Miami to me was one of the teams that needed to make a trade the most. I mean, they have the draft capital and they have players that teams still find valuable. Guys like Max Strus, Victor Oladipo, and Kyle Lowry could have had some pretty good returns for the Heat, and the Heat just didn't make any moves. And when you go back to last year in the Eastern Conference Finals, what was the main thing that everyone was saying? Everyone was saying that the Heat needed a shot creator next to Jimmy Butler, and the Heat failed to put a guy next to him. Now I believe that they're waiting on Tyler Hero to really break out. But you can't keep waiting when you have a guy like Jimmy Butler who's 33 years old and wants to win now. And you never know once his contract runs out that he'll be on another team and other guys will start to leave as well. So the Heat are one of the losers at the trade deadline since they did nothing to improve their team in a top-heavy Eastern Conference. And now on to the second winner of the trade deadline, and the second winner is the Phoenix Suns. And really all I have to say about this one is Kevin Durant. Now in hindsight, this is a really good trade for the Suns, but if you look deeper into the trade, then you can see that the Suns lost some pretty valuable pieces. I mean, not even bringing up the picks, because in order to get a superstar, you pretty much have to give up your picks. But looking at it from a player's perspective, they lost 2 really good players. Mikal Bridges, a guy who was the best defender on the team and also one of the best off-ball shooters. They lost him. And then Cam Johnson, a solid player off the bench who had a lot of potential. They lost him as well. But to be real, I believe that the Suns have gotten a lot scarier. Getting a guy like Kevin Durant, who's a walking 30-point per game guy, and pairing him up next to Devin Booker, Chris Paul, and DeAndre Ayton is always a plus. And KD may be the guy that takes them over the top. CP3 is declining, but now he doesn't have to worry about being the second best scorer on the team. And really now he can just play make. And that's a huge plus for him. He's in a perfect situation for this point in his career, and I think that he benefited the most from this trade. And that's why I believe the Suns are the second winner of the trade deadline. And now moving on to the second loser of the trade deadline, and that team is the Chicago Bulls. And the Bulls basically did nothing. I mean, you would think a team that's 11th in the Eastern Conference, who was one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference last season and has 2 all-star caliber players on his team, would want to improve his roster, but they just didn't at all. I mean, the Bulls have a bunch of movable pieces. They have Nikola Vucevic, who has some trade value, and then they still have young players who could go for a lot like Patrick Williams, Kobe White, and Ayo Dosunmu, or more importantly, move either Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan. I see them the same way I see CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard. A duo who of course can get their own shot but can't defend or play make, and the rest of the team is not talented enough to pick up the slack. I mean, this Bulls team will never work if Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan are its best players, so they should have moved at least one of them. But of course they didn't, and that's why they're the second loser at the trade deadline. And now moving on to the last winner of the trade deadline, and that team is the LA Clippers. They made one of the best moves in trading for Mason Plumlee, who's having one of the best years of his career. A guy who can come off the bench next to Zubac and give them close to the same production that he does. They definitely filled a big hole in their roster, which was their backup center, and Mason Plumlee is the perfect guy to do that. And then they got a guy in Bones Highland who, if used right, has a lot of potential in this league. If they actually play him and allow him to run the offense, then I think he could be really good and give this Clippers team something that they haven't had since they got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. A guy who can be a playmaking and scoring threat for them at the same time. So I thought that was a really good pickup. And then another sneaky pickup that they had was Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon's a veteran who can give them really good spacing and also give them very good minutes off the bench. So the Clippers overall made some really good moves. They didn't really give up that much and went for all the right guys. They filled a lot of holes in their roster and did it while not giving up that much. And that's why I believe that they're one of the winners at the trade deadline. And now moving on to the last loser of the trade deadline. And that team is the Atlanta Hawks. And Atlanta really didn't do anything. I mean, all they did was trade for Saddiq Bey, but I feel like there were a lot more holes that they needed to fill. They could have gotten more depth off the bench and gotten more defense at the wing position. And then of course they still haven't found a deal for John Collins and Bojan Bogdanovic. The Hawks have been pretty disappointing this season, and moving those two could have been a really big step forward. John Collins and Bogdan Bogdanovic are two really good, solid young players, and they could have a lot of trade value around the league, but the Hawks just didn't come up with a trade for them. I mean, I felt like the Hawks really could have gotten a lot better if they would have traded at least one of them, but they just didn't. And that's why the Hawks are one of the losers at the trade deadline. And now to end the video, those are my 3 biggest winners and losers at the NBA trade deadline. Now, if you made it all the way to the end, make sure you leave a like, and also make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. All of my social media links will be down below in the description. Streams coming soon, more videos just like this on the way, and as always, I'm out. Peace.